When my grandpa left me his $1.4 million beach house, I quietly moved it into a trust. A month later, my parents showed up smirking. "We had the deed transferred. You're out by Sunday." I just smiled. On Monday, they returned with buyers and went pale when my lawyer walked out holding the papers. I, 32M, was sitting on the weathered deck of my grandfather's beach house when they arrived. The salt air was thick that afternoon, and I'd been watching the waves crash against the rocks below, thinking about the old man who'd spent his last years in this exact spot. The sound of tires on gravel broke my meditation. I knew who it was before I even turned around. My parents hadn't visited once in the month since the funeral. Not to check on me, not to share memories, not even to pretend they cared about the property their father had left behind. But there they were, stepping out of their luxury sedan with expressions I recognized immediately. That particular blend of smugness and barely contained excitement that meant they thought they'd won something. My father approached first, my mother trailing slightly behind with her arms crossed. They didn't bother with pleasantries. My father announced, with the kind of confidence that comes from years of bulldozing over everyone in his path, that they'd had the deed transferred to their names. The house was theirs now. I needed to be out by Sunday. 3 days. He said it like he was doing me a favor by giving me that much time. I just sat there, coffee mug in hand, and smiled. My mother added that they'd already contacted a real estate agent. The property would be listed by next week. She suggested I take whatever personal items I wanted and leave the rest. They'd handle the clearing out. She said this while looking at the vintage furniture my grandfather had collected over decades, probably already calculating its resale value. I asked them how they'd managed that, keeping my voice level and genuinely curious. My father launched into an explanation about legal loopholes and technicalities, about how, as the son of the deceased, he had certain rights that superseded a simple will. He'd hired an attorney who specialized in estate law. It had cost him a pretty penny, he admitted, but it would be worth it. This house was worth $1.4 million, he reminded me, as if I didn't know. As if I hadn't spent summers here as a kid, back when my parents still pretended to care about family. I nodded along, taking another sip of coffee. I told them I understood and would be out by Sunday. My mother looked almost disappointed that I wasn't putting up a fight. My father just clapped his hands together once, satisfied, and they left without another word. The truth was, I'd been expecting this exact scenario for weeks. My grandfather had been sharp until the very end, sharper than anyone gave him credit for. In his final months, when the cancer had reduced him to a shadow of himself, he'd pulled me aside during one of my daily visits. He told me he was leaving me the beach house. Not my father. Not split between family members. Just me. He said I was the only one who'd actually cared about him in his last years, the only one who visited without an agenda. Then he'd warned me. He knew my father would try something. My parents had always been like that, calculating, opportunistic, seeing relationships as transactions. My grandfather had worked his entire life building a modest fortune, and my father had always expected to inherit all of it. Finding out the beach house was going to me would drive him insane. So my grandfather had suggested something. He told me about a lawyer friend of his, someone who specialized in estate planning and trusts. He said if I was smart, I'd move the property into an irrevocable trust immediately after inheriting it. Make myself the trustee, but put conditions on it that would make it impossible for anyone else to touch. He made me promise I'd do it. I promised. 3 days after the funeral, while my parents were busy arguing with the executor about other assets, I met with the lawyer. His name was on a card my grandfather had left in an envelope for me. The man was in his 70s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from seeing every legal trick in the book. He'd been waiting for my call. We spent 4 hours going over the details. The house was transferred into an irrevocable trust with me as the sole trustee and beneficiary. The terms were ironclad. No one could remove the property from the trust except under extremely specific circumstances, none of which my parents could manufacture. The trust was structured in a way that even if someone obtained a fraudulent deed, it would be legally meaningless. The property wasn't in my name anymore. It was in the trust's name, and I controlled the trust. The lawyer had smiled when we finished the paperwork. He told me my grandfather had been one of his closest friends, and he'd seen what kind of people my parents were. He'd be honored to help protect what the old man had wanted to preserve. We filed everything with the county recorder's office that same week. It was all completely legal and properly documented. And then I waited. I knew my father would hire some cut-rate attorney who'd tell him what he wanted to hear. I knew he'd find some angle, some supposed loophole, that would make him think he could steal the property. My grandfather had predicted it all perfectly. Sunday came and went. I stayed in the house, went about my routine. I worked remotely from the deck, took walks on the beach, cooked dinner in my grandfather's kitchen. I half expected my parents to show up, but they didn't. They were probably giving me the silent treatment, thinking I was scrambling to find a new place to live. Monday morning, I was reading on the deck when I heard vehicles. Multiple vehicles. I looked up to see my parents' sedan followed by a black Mercedes and a white BMW. My father stepped out first, then my mother, then a couple in their 50s dressed in expensive casual wear, and finally a woman in a blazer carrying a tablet, the real estate agent. My father's smile was enormous. He called out to me, asking if I was all packed up. The buyers were here to tour their new property. He wanted me gone within the hour. I stood up slowly, stretching. I told them that wouldn't be possible. The real estate agent looked confused, glancing between me and my parents. My father's smile faltered. He said they'd been patient enough, and I needed to stop being difficult. The property was theirs now, legal and binding. I suggested they might want to check on that. That's when my lawyer's car pulled up the driveway. He'd been parked down the road, waiting for my text. I'd sent it the moment I'd seen the caravan arrive. He stepped out, briefcase in hand, looking every bit the experienced attorney he was. He greeted everyone politely, then introduced himself as my legal counsel. My father's face went red. He demanded to know what this was about. My lawyer calmly explained that there seemed to be some confusion about the property ownership. He asked if my father had the deed he claimed to have obtained. My father fumbled with his phone, then pulled up an email and showed it to my lawyer. It was a deed, all right, filed with the county, showing the transfer of the property from my name to my parents' names. My father looked triumphant. My lawyer examined it, nodded thoughtfully, then reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a folder and handed it to my father. Inside were copies of the trust documents, the original transfer of the property into the trust, and a letter from the county recorder's office confirming that the property was owned by the trust, not by me personally, and had been for nearly a month. The deed my father had obtained was worthless. You can't transfer property you don't own. Since the house hadn't been in my name for weeks before his lawyer filed the fraudulent deed, his entire scheme was void. Worse, attempting to file a fraudulent deed transfer was potentially a criminal act. My father's face went from red to white. He started stammering, saying his attorney had assured him this would work. My lawyer asked for that attorney's name and made a note of it. He mentioned that the state bar might be interested in hearing about a lawyer who'd helped facilitate deed fraud. The prospective buyers looked horrified. They immediately started backing toward their car, the husband saying something about not wanting to be involved in any legal issues. The real estate agent apologized to them profusely, shooting daggers at my parents. She followed the couple to their car, already on her phone, probably calling her broker. My mother found her voice first. She said this was ridiculous, that I was being vindictive and cruel. The house should have gone to my father in the first place. I was being selfish. I finally spoke up. I told her that my grandfather had made his wishes clear. He'd wanted me to have the house because I was the one who'd cared about him. Not his money, not his property, him. I'd visited him every single day in his last 6 months. I'd sat with him through chemo appointments, brought him groceries, fixed things around this house when he couldn't do it himself. Meanwhile, they'd visited maybe 3 times, each visit lasting less than an hour, each one ending with thinly veiled questions about his will. My father tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I told them that my grandfather had known exactly what they were. He'd known they'd try to take this from me, and he'd help me protect it. Everything I'd done was legal and at his direction. Everything they'd done was an attempt at theft. My lawyer added that we had grounds for a lawsuit. Attempted deed fraud, emotional distress, potentially even elder abuse, given some things my grandfather had documented before his death. He suggested my parents retain counsel of their own, someone competent this time. They stood there, deflated. My mother started crying, but they weren't real tears. I'd seen her deploy fake crying my entire life to get sympathy. My father just looked empty, like someone had unplugged him. I told them they needed to leave. They were no longer welcome on this property. If they returned, I'd call the police and have them removed for trespassing. My lawyer handed my father his business card and said all future communication should go through him. They left without another word. The house fell quiet again except for the waves. My lawyer stayed for a bit, making sure I was okay. He told me he'd file a formal complaint with the county about the fraudulent deed and would monitor the situation to ensure my parents didn't try anything else. He also suggested I consider a restraining order if they harassed me further. Before he left, he shook my hand and said my grandfather would be proud. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since that confrontation, and things have gotten interesting. My parents haven't contacted me directly, but I've heard through extended family that they're in serious trouble. Apparently, the attorney they hired wasn't just incompetent, he was operating with a suspended license. When my lawyer reported the fraudulent deed to the state bar and the county prosecutor's office, it opened an investigation that revealed this guy had been running similar schemes for other clients. My parents are now potential witnesses in a criminal case, though there's talk they might face charges themselves depending on how much they knew about the fraud. My father has been desperately claiming ignorance, saying he trusted his attorney's advice. Whether that holds up, I don't know. The extended family has split into camps. Some think I should have just let my parents have the house to keep the peace. These are mostly people who never liked my grandfather much anyway, who always thought he was too hard on my father. Others have reached out privately to tell me they're glad I stood my ground, that my parents had it coming. My aunt, my father's sister, called me last week. She apologized for her brother's behavior and told me something I hadn't known. Apparently, my grandfather had loaned my father over $100,000 through the years for various business ventures, none of which ever succeeded. My father had never paid any of it back. My grandfather had written it off as a loss years ago, but had never forgotten it. That context made his decision to leave me the house make even more sense. I've been settling into life here more permanently. I had most of my belongings shipped from my apartment in the city and officially made this my primary residence. The remote work situation is ideal, and I've found I'm more productive with the ocean as my office view. I've started making some updates to the place. Nothing major, just maintenance my grandfather had let slide in his final years. New paint, fixing some deck boards, updating the kitchen appliances. I found a box in the attic last week while looking for some tools. Inside were letters my grandfather had written but never sent. Most were to my grandmother, who'd passed away 15 years ago. Reading them felt intrusive at first, but one was addressed to me, dated just a month before he died. In it, he wrote about how proud he was of the man I'd become. He said he knew leaving me the house would cause problems, but he hoped I'd understand why he did it. He wanted me to have a place that was truly mine, where I could build a life free from the toxic patterns he'd seen in his own son. He apologized for the burden it might place on me, but trusted I was strong enough to handle it. He ended the letter by telling me to live well, to fill the house with better memories than the ones my parents would have created, to invite friends, start a family if I wanted, or just enjoy the solitude and the sea. Whatever made me happy. I keep that letter on the mantle now. Update 2. A month has passed since the incident, and the legal fallout continues to spread. The attorney my parents hired has been officially disbarred, and criminal charges have been filed against him for fraud and practicing law with a suspended license. My parents were questioned extensively by investigators, and, from what my lawyer tells me, they've been cleared of criminal charges. The prosecutor determined they were victims of the attorney's scheme rather than willing participants. However, being cleared criminally doesn't mean they're off the hook. The county has filed civil penalties against them for the fraudulent deed filing, and they're looking at significant fines. More than that, though, the situation has destroyed their reputation in their social circle. Turns out attempting to steal your father's bequest to his grandson doesn't play well at the country club. My mother called me 2 weeks ago. I let it go to voicemail. In the message, she said they'd lost friends over this, that people were treating them differently. She said I'd humiliated them and destroyed their standing in the community. She asked how I could do this to my own parents. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd tried to do. Just victimhood. I didn't call back. My father sent an email a few days later. It was more measured, probably written with legal advice. He said they'd made a mistake trusting bad legal counsel, and while he still believed he had a moral right to the property as my grandfather's son, he accepted that legally the matter was settled. He suggested we move forward as a family and put this behind us. Again, no real apology, Just a businesslike proposal to rug sweep everything. I responded with one line: all future communication should go through my attorney. The house has become my sanctuary. I've gotten into a routine of morning walks on the beach, work during the day, and evenings spent reading or just sitting on the deck. I've had a few friends visit, and they've all commented on how different I seem. Calmer, more grounded. One friend joked that I'd become the grandfather, old before my time in my beach house. I took it as a compliment. I've also started going through my grandfather's things more thoroughly, with the intention of preserving what matters and clearing out what doesn't. In his study, I found journals going back 40 years. I've been reading them slowly, getting to know him in a way I never could when he was alive. He wrote about his disappointments with my father, his worries about the kind of man he'd raised. But he also wrote about me, about visits when I was a kid, about conversations we'd had as I got older. It's bittersweet, but it's helped me understand his decision even better. The property value has actually increased since all this happened. Apparently, beachfront real estate in this area is booming. That 1.4 million estimate is now closer to 1.6. My parents must be seething, but that's not my problem anymore. I've decided to stay here indefinitely. This isn't just my grandfather's house anymore. It's mine. And I'm going to honor his memory by doing exactly what he wanted. Living well, on my own terms, protected by the trust he helped me create. Some family rifts never heal, and I've made peace with that. My parents made their choice when they decided property was more important than integrity. I made mine when I chose to honor my grandfather's wishes and protect what he'd given me. The waves keep rolling in, constant and unbothered by human drama. I'm learning to be the same way.